According to Carly, her mother had talked about divorce. And when I specifically asked Carly if she thinks that her stepfather killed her mom, her answer is harrowing.
They get into fights more often when they drink, and I guess lately they've been drinking more. So I'm just concerned that something happened that can't be undone.
Her husband is being detained after telling the Royal Bahamian Police that she just fell overboard.
I just know that him and her mom had some rocky issues.
Her mother and Brian had been drinking a lot lately and said that, this is what Carly said, that Carly's mom, Lynette, said that when Brian was drinking, it was so bad, it was embarrassing for the people around them to see his behavior.
I heard from my lawyer that it turned into a criminal investigation last night.
A retired couple, a 55-foot sailing boat named Soulmate, the Bahamas, and a wife who is missing. Her husband says she fell overboard from an 8-foot rubber dinghy that was moving at a few knots through calm water on a mild evening. He says she took the engine's kill switch with her when she went in, which would require her to have been at the helm gripping the cord at the exact moment she fell. Those closest to her say she almost never drove that dinghy. He waited 9 hours before calling for help. And here is what the people who knew this couple have been sitting with ever since. If Lynette Hooker had privately told her closest friends and family that she did not feel safe with Brian, if she had attempted to leave him twice, the second time, approximately 2 years before she vanished, if she had sent private messages to a friend saying she probably should have left him 15 years earlier, that she felt completely numb, that she regretted not getting out sooner. What was the state of this marriage in the weeks before that dinghy left the shore? If Brian Hooker had a known history of losing his temper, if sources describe an incident in which he grabbed a young girl by the throat, if approximately 2 years before Lynette disappeared, he physically choked her and explicitly threatened to throw her overboard, and if a photograph exists showing bruises covering Lynette's back that was shared with her mother and reportedly forwarded to investigators, how do you read those words, "I'll throw you overboard," against what actually happened? If Lynette was a retired AT&T employee believed to carry a life insurance policy from that career, if Brian, by contrast, had no equivalent retirement income, if Lynette herself had acknowledged in private messages that the relationship made more financial sense than living apart, if she had no home to return to, no apartment, nothing, because the boat was everything they owned, what was keeping a woman who wanted to leave from being able to leave? And if the kill switch Brian says she took with her would require her to have been at the helm at the exact moment she fell, and sources confirm she rarely if ever operated that dinghy, and Brian, a former Marine and strong swimmer, says the small electric motor's loss of power left him unable to go after her, and he waited 9 hours in mild conditions before anyone knew a woman was missing at sea. What actually happened on that water? Stay with me to the end, because Lynette Hooker's daughter was asked directly whether she believes Brian killed her mother. Her answer is one of the most chilling things this case has produced. Lynette Hooker, missing, Bahamian waters. The investigation is active, and the questions surrounding that night are far from settled. Family, before I walk you through the full picture of this case, the night Lynette disappeared, the 9-hour gap, the kill switch question, the AIS tracking data that partially supports Brian's account and the questions it still cannot answer, the private messages Lynette sent over years documenting a marriage in collapse, the prior choking incident and the explicit threat, the photograph of the bruises, the financial trap that kept her from leaving, the daughter's answer when asked if she believes Brian killed her mother, and where this investigation stands right now. Before all of that, we stop, because Lynette Hooker is still missing, and this is not a cold case. This is a woman who disappeared days ago and has not been found. Let's pray, Lord, for Lynette, still missing in the waters near Elbow Cay, the Bahamas, for her daughter who launched a fundraising campaign to travel to the place where her mother was last seen alive and find out whether this investigation is being taken seriously, for the truth, for the full account of what happened on that water, for Lynette to be found. Amen. Type Amen. Where are you watching from? Country and city. Type it now. Subscribe, because this case is developing and every update matters. Now, let me show you what we know about that night. Let me take you through the timeline as Brian Hooker has described it to the Royal Bahamian Police. Not as fact, as the account that investigators are now working to verify, contradict, or fill in. Because understanding his account precisely is the only way to understand why specific elements of it have drawn such serious scrutiny. The couple, Brian and Lynette Hooker, were retired Americans who had sold everything they owned on the mainland and moved aboard a 55-foot keelboat they named Soulmate. The boat was not a vacation. It was their only home. By the time Lynette disappeared, the couple had been navigating the northern Bahamas, a stretch of water made up of countless small islands, and had anchored near Elbow Cay, a narrow 6-mile barrier island within the Abaco Islands chain. They were experienced sailors. This was their life. The evening of the disappearance. On the evening in question, Brian and Lynette took their small 8-foot rubber dinghy to shore. They had dinner at a nearby shoreside restaurant, a routine they had followed many times before. Sources confirmed the dinghy had appeared on their social media on multiple occasions, with Brian typically at the controls. The couple left the restaurant at approximately 7:30 in the evening. They boarded the dinghy to head back to Soulmate. According to Brian, during that return trip, Lynette went into the water. He says the dinghy's motion threw her overboard. He says that when she went in, she took the engine's kill switch with her, a safety device that plugs into the motor and prevents it from running without the attached cord. Without the kill switch, he could not restart the motor, so he could not go after her. He drifted. He paddled. He made his way through open water and eventually pushed through thick brush to reach shore. He did not contact authorities until nearly 4 in the morning. That is approximately 9 hours after the couple left the restaurant. What the AIS data shows, maritime tracking data from an automatic identification system, which records a vessel's real-time position, speed, and heading through onboard transponders, does appear to partially support one element of Brian's account. The tracking data confirms the dinghy's position near the restaurant earlier that evening and later shows movement up the coastline, consistent with the drift route Brian described to Bahamian Police. That detail does lend credibility to the physical timeline he provided. Investigators and those following the case have acknowledged it. But the AIS data answers one question while leaving far more unresolved. It confirms where the dinghy went after Lynette allegedly disappeared. It does not explain what happened in the moments before. It does not explain the 9 hours. It does not explain the kill switch. A confirmed drift path is not a confirmed account. Type the timeline if you're tracking what Brian's account says happened and where the gaps begin. Stay to the end, because the specific elements of that account that investigators and those who knew this couple find most difficult to accept are where this case begins to darken significantly. Now let me walk through the 3 elements of Brian's account that have drawn the most serious scrutiny, not speculation. The specific forensic and logical questions that investigators and those close to this case have been asking since Lynette was first reported missing. Question 1. The kill switch. The engine kill switch is the element of Brian's account that has generated the most immediate doubt among those familiar with it. The device works similarly to the safety cord on a jet ski. It plugs into the motor with a small rope attached, and without it plugged in, the engine cannot run. The idea behind it is safety. If the operator falls overboard, the cord detaches, the engine stops, and the boat doesn't continue without them. Brian's account requires Lynette to have been holding that kill switch at the exact moment she was thrown from the dinghy. For the cord to have gone with her, she would have needed to be at the helm, controlling the motor when she fell. But sources confirm that Lynette rarely, if ever, operated the dinghy. Brian was almost always at the controls. Her daughter confirmed that Lynette essentially never drove the dinghy. Oh, if Brian was, as was routine, at the controls that evening, he would have had the kill switch. Not Lynette. And if the kill switch was attached to the helm rather than physically worn on anyone's wrist, taking it with her during a fall would have required grabbing it in mid-fall, a presence of mind that is difficult to imagine in that moment. Brian has not explained whether Lynette was actually driving that night. That specific question, who had the kill switch and why, has gone unanswered. Question 2. The dinghy itself. The second element of Brian's account that has drawn scrutiny is the nature of the vessel and what it would actually take to be thrown from it. The dinghy was an 8-foot rubber inflatable, fitted with a small electric motor capable of only a few knots. A few knots, in mild conditions. With winds around 20 miles per hour and a current of roughly 3 knots, not a storm by any measure. Conditions that experienced sailors described as entirely routine for a short dinghy trip. Sources familiar with the boat described it as slow and low to the water, the kind of vessel more likely to ride over waves gently than to violently throw a passenger overboard. Lynette was described as a strong swimmer, as was Brian, a former Marine. The idea that someone would be forcefully thrown clear of a slow-moving, low-riding rubber inflatable in mild conditions has struck many observers as difficult to accept. Brian offered no further detail beyond the basic claim that she went overboard. No description of the sea state at that specific moment. No explanation of what specific motion of the vessel caused the fall. Just the assertion that she went over. Question 3. The 9 hours. The third element is the one that has drawn the most immediate, sustained attention. 9 hours. From approximately 7:30 in the evening, when the couple left the restaurant, until nearly 4 in the morning, when Brian reached authorities. Even accepting the drift account at face value, even granting that the AIS data confirms the trajectory, the question of why nearly 9 hours passed before a woman missing at sea was reported has not been satisfactorily explained. Experienced sailors carry communication equipment. The Bahamian waters near the Abaco Islands are not remote wilderness. The couple's sailboat was anchored nearby. Other vessels sail those waters regularly. Lynette's daughter identified specific questions that stopped making sense to her immediately. Why would Lynette swim away from the dinghy rather than toward it? Why did Brian not drop anchor to search for her? The dinghy had an anchor on board. Why wait until 4 in the morning? The current near the anchorage was reportedly mild. Not the kind of current that rapidly carries someone away from a dinghy in a matter of seconds. Water conditions that allow a couple to make a routine dinghy trip for dinner are conditions in which a man with a military background, who is also a strong swimmer, might reasonably be expected to do more than drift for 9 hours. Those 9 hours are the center of this investigation. Type 3 questions if you're holding the full weight of the kill switch, the dinghy and the 9 hours, and why each one matters. Stay to the end. Because the private messages Lynette sent over years, the picture she painted of this marriage before she disappeared, is the context that makes the questions surrounding that night impossible to separate from everything that came before. Stop right here. If you are still watching, you are about to see the private messages Lynette sent to friends over years, documenting a marriage that had been collapsing for a long time. The prior choking incident 2 years before her disappearance, and the explicit threat to throw her overboard. The photograph of bruises on Lynette's back. The financial trap that made leaving feel impossible. What Brian's own children have said about his account. Lynette's daughter's answer when asked directly whether she believes Brian killed her mother, described by those who heard it as chilling. And where the investigation stands right now. Most people click away before the sections that build the full picture of who Lynette Hooker was, what she was living through, and what those closest to her believe happened. Don't. Because the full picture is what this case demands. 30 seconds. Subscribe. This case is developing. When the investigation produces charges, findings, or Lynette's location, you want to be here. Like. Tell the world that a missing woman in the Bahamas deserves to be seen and talked about. Share. Someone in your circle may know someone connected to this case, or may have been in those waters that night. Type subscribed. Now, the private messages. Let me take you through what Lynette Hooker had been telling the people closest to her long before that dinghy left the shore. Not because it proves what happened that night, but because it is the documented context that investigators, and those who loved Lynette, say is impossible to ignore. Years of private messages. Over the period from 2015 through 2022, Lynette sent private messages to at least one close friend that painted the picture of a woman emotionally worn down, actively considering divorce, and desperate for a way out of a marriage that had been in serious trouble for a long time. She had attempted to leave Brian twice before. The first time, during her daughter's high school years. The reasons were never fully explained, though divorce had been discussed. Brian was reportedly found in tears when he learned she intended to leave. The second time, approximately 2 years before she disappeared. That separation was directly triggered by a specific incident that this video will address shortly. Both times, she came back. Financial dependency was the primary reason. Everything she had was tied to Brian and the boat. Leaving would have meant returning to family on the mainland and coming out of retirement to support herself. She had at one point discussed taking a post office job just to afford independence. That is the financial reality she was facing. In her most recent messages before she disappeared, Lynette described walking out after a period of relentless conflict and verbal hostility. She wrote about feeling completely numb. She wrote about regretting not leaving years earlier. She wrote about facing the frightening reality of rebuilding her life from nothing and sensing a strange relief at the thought of freedom. Relief at the thought of freedom from a marriage named Soulmate. What she said about him. Lynette described Brian's behavior when drinking as persistent, growing, and visibly troubling to people around them. She described conflicts disturbing enough to embarrass those who witnessed them. She described verbal hostility that eventually pushed her to pack her bags and leave temporarily for Florida. She told those closest to her that she did not feel safe with Brian. Those words, "I do not feel safe," were shared with at least one close friend and with her mother, who was her primary confidant throughout the marriage. There was also a late-night voice message sent to her daughter in the period before the disappearance, a message that hinted things had gotten worse. It was not taken seriously at the time. Those signs now look very different in hindsight. The photograph. A photograph reportedly exists, showing bruises covering Lynette's back. The image was shared with her mother through a mutual friend and is believed to have been forwarded to authorities as part of the ongoing investigation. The source of those injuries was never confirmed with absolute certainty, but those familiar with the situation said they had little doubt about what the photograph indicated. The threat. And then there is this. Approximately 2 years before Lynette disappeared, Brian physically choked her and explicitly threatened to throw her overboard. That threat, those words, now paired with what actually happened, have made it nearly impossible for those close to Lynette to view the events of that night as coincidental. You threatened to throw her overboard, and she went overboard. Those closest to her are not treating that as a coincidence. Type the messages, if you're holding the full documented picture of what Lynette was living through, and what she was telling people about it. Stay to the end, because what Brian's own children said about his account, and what Lynette's daughter said when asked directly if she believes he killed her mother, is the emotional and analytical close of this case. Let me show you what the people who have known Brian Hooker the longest are saying about his account. Because when a man's own children are questioning whether he made a genuine effort to save someone, that is a data point that belongs in this conversation. Brian's own children have expressed doubts about their father's account. Not accusations. They have stopped short of a direct accusation, but they have questioned whether Brian made a genuine effort to locate Lynette after she went into the water. The emotional difficulty of suspecting a parent has kept them from stating anything conclusively, and that is understandable. Holding that kind of doubt about someone you love is one of the most painful things a person can be asked to carry. What is documented about Brian's history with his children is also relevant. Sources describe an incident in which Brian physically grabbed a young girl, approximately 12 years old at the time, by the throat during a heated argument. The incident resulted in a court case. Following that, his children stopped coming around entirely. His relationship with his own kids has remained fractured ever since. One daughter has had no contact with him since that incident. He maintains limited communication with one son and stays in touch with another daughter, who was reportedly planning to travel to the Bahamas, not to question what happened, but to support her father and assist in the search. That daughter acknowledged the difficulty of accepting what the evidence might suggest about someone she loves. What Lynette's daughter said. Lynette's daughter has been more direct. She was asked directly whether she believes Brian was responsible for her mother's fate. Her answer, described by those who heard it as harrowing, was this. She did not rule out the possibility. She acknowledged that his anger may have taken over in a way that led to something irreversible. And she said the possibility of deliberate action could not be ruled out. She stopped short of calling it fully intentional. But she made clear that in her view, 2 possible scenarios exist. Either Lynette fell accidentally, and Brian chose to abandon her rather than help, possibly with a life insurance payout in mind. Or something far more deliberate occurred that night on the water. Accident, followed by abandonment. Or deliberate action. Those are the 2 possibilities her daughter is sitting with. She also said something else that stayed with those who heard it. She had long feared Brian might hurt her mother in some way. She had watched the pattern develop. The bruises. The threatening words. The escalating conflict. The behavior that made people around them uncomfortable. She just never anticipated anything this severe. Brian's own statement. An attorney based in the Bahamas released a statement on Brian's behalf. The statement declares that Brian completely denies any wrongdoing, disputes the claims made by Lynette's daughter, and confirms he has been cooperating with authorities. No further public comment will be made while the investigation continues. When Brian first contacted Lynette's daughter in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, the conversation was brief. He mentioned wanting to visit the family. He introduced himself as Dad, a term she had never used for him and did not consider appropriate. Those familiar with the exchange described that choice of words as notably strange under the circumstances. His calls went unanswered. Type the family if you're holding what Brian's own children and Lynette's daughter are each saying, and why the difference between those two positions matters. Stay to the end, because where the investigation stands right now, and what it would take to bring Lynette home or bring answers to her family, is how we close. Here is where this case stands as of April 9th. The confirmed picture. Lynette Hooker, retired American, sailor, mother, disappeared in the waters near Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands, Bahamas, on the evening she and her husband Brian left a shoreside restaurant at approximately 7:30 p.m. Brian reported her missing to authorities at approximately 4 in the morning, nearly 9 hours later. Brian Hooker remains detained by the Royal Bahamian Police. No formal charges have been filed. He maintains his innocence and has stated he is cooperating with authorities. The AIS tracking data appears to confirm the drift route Brian described, lending credibility to the physical timeline of his story, while leaving the events during and before Lynette's disappearance unaccounted for. A criminal investigation has been formally opened by Bahamian authorities. The U.S. Coast Guard launched a separate inquiry and participated in search and rescue operations throughout the Abaco Islands. Lynette has not been found. The documented background. Private messages from 2015 through 2022 show Lynette describing a marriage in serious and escalating trouble, a husband whose drinking behavior was disturbing to those around them, and her own stated sense that she did not feel safe. She attempted to leave Brian twice. Financial dependency and the fact that the boat was their only home brought her back both times. Approximately 2 years before she disappeared, Brian physically choked Lynette and explicitly threatened to throw her overboard. A photograph showing bruises on Lynette's back was shared with her mother and reportedly forwarded to investigators. The kill switch question, who had it, why it went with Lynette if she rarely drove the dinghy, and how it ended up in the water has not been answered. The 9-hour gap has not been explained to the satisfaction of investigators or those close to Lynette. What Lynette's daughter is doing. Lynette's daughter has launched a fundraising campaign titled "Help Find and Honor My Missing Mom" to travel to the Bahamas, to see with her own eyes the place where her mother was last seen alive, and to determine whether the investigation is being taken with the seriousness it deserves. The language of that campaign carries a heartbreaking undertone. The possibility of laying her mother to rest, rather than simply finding her alive, is already present in how those funds might ultimately be used. That is the reality of where this case is. A daughter preparing for the worst while fighting for the truth. If you have information, if you were in the waters near Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands on the evening of the disappearance, if you saw anything on the water that night, a dinghy, a person in the water, any vessel in that area during those hours, please contact Royal Bahamian Police Force U.S. Coast Guard, 1-800-BE-ALERT, 1-800-232-5378, U.S. Embassy Nassau, plus 124-232-21181. If you have any information about this case that could assist the investigation, please come forward. Lynette's family needs answers, and investigators need every piece of information available. Type Lynette Hooker right now. In the comments, type your country and city. Type Amen. For a woman who was told her whole life that leaving wasn't an option. For a daughter who is now traveling to a foreign country to fight for the truth about her mother. For the investigation to move quickly. For Lynette to be found. Subscribe, because this case is moving. When charges are filed, when the investigation produces findings, when Lynette's location is determined, you want to be here. Family, I love you, every single one watching. She told people she did not feel safe. She tried to leave twice, and 2 years before she disappeared, he threatened to throw her overboard. Now she is missing from a boat in the Bahamas, and the questions surrounding that night are far from settled. I'll see you in the next one. God bless. I'm Marcus Webb, and if you're new here, subscribe and join us. Like, share, and be part of the family.